Every guy has these core questions that we ask ourselves. If we dare to look inside and wrestle with them, am I good enough? Am I man enough? Do I have what it takes? And how will I even know? It's difficult to figure out what it means to be a real man. And in our culture, there's all these different views about what a real man actually is. Is a real man strong and tough and can bench press 1,000 pounds and has a big beard and drives a pickup truck with a gun rack in the back? Or is a real man the guy who's sensitive and kind and shares his feelings and cries at commercials? Is a real man someone with all sorts of leadership abilities or good in bed? Like, what is a real man? It can be confusing, and I think for a lot of guys, we feel a lot of pressure to try to be the right kind of man, the right kind of brother, the right kind of friend, the right kind of boyfriend or husband, the right kind of dad. And we feel pressure from all sides, and for a lot of us, we didn't have great role models, maybe even growing up. So we didn't have a father figure that really invested in us, or we didn't have a good picture of a marriage. And so trying to be a good husband or try to be a good dad, like, where do we even start with that? And we want to hit the target. We want to be the kind of man that the people around us need us to be and that we want to be. But so often in life, it can feel like the target is fuzzy, like it's moving, like we're not even sure really where we're supposed to aim. And so in this series, we want to make sure that we're hitting the target, that we're aiming where God wants us to aim, and that we're becoming the man that God wants us to become, and that our friends, our family, our spouses, our children need us to be.
Come on, man.
When we let God define who we are as a man rather than culture, we find out that it's really not the target that's moving at all. We find the definition that God has for a man, which we're going to discover throughout this series. And then it's the small adjustments that we make, the little decisions we make, the day in, the day out decisions. Just like in archery, when we look at the target from a distance, it's these small decisions that we make, the tweaks that we make here that will allow us to hit the target, to get a bullseye. And we all want that bullseye in life when it comes to being the man that we're supposed to be. And it's the small adjustments. It's the little things that we'll do here from a distance, that we'll do now in these moments, that will allow us to hit the bullseye of being the man that we want to be. And so over the next weeks, we're going to take aim at what it means to be a real man. We're going to make adjustments. We're going to break through the confusion so that we can be on target. But to do that, we need to understand what the target is and what the target isn't.
Come on, man.
In almost any cultural depiction that we have in the United States about what it means to be a man, there's some truth to it. But oftentimes it's just misguided. It's off a little bit. And if we'll make small adjustments and small changes, then we can really live out what it means to be a real man. For example, in our culture, the idea that a man needs to be a warrior, that he needs to be somebody who's willing to fight. Well, there's some truth to that. We need to be willing to fight for the right things. As a matter of fact, every man knows that there are battles worth fighting for. And we can't sit back, be passive, lay down, let somebody else do our fighting. We need to fight, but we need to fight for the right things. And so in this series, we're going to learn to fight as men, but to fight for the right things and in the right ways.
Come on, man.
We've got these stereotypical pictures of what a strong man is in our society. They got the big beard and the flannel, and they got a gun rack in the back, and they can bench press 1,000 pounds. And if you're not that, then you're not a real man. Oh, come on, man. We know that that's not the case. We know that being a real man is way more than biceps and beards. We're called to be, though, strong men. But it's not the kind of strength that you might think. It's different than that. And the kind of strength that God talks about is this strength that is going all in, this strength that doesn't back down, a strength that is all about courage and faith, Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward in the face of fear. It's being unafraid and diving into the mix, an attitude where we're willing to do whatever it takes to hit that target that we're aiming for. When you think about Jesus, what do you think about when it comes to him being a man? Do you think about him being strong or weak? Most people think about Jesus being this kind of meek and mild person who, brought a little kid up on his knee and patted people on the head and hugged people and put a little lamb over his shoulders. And there is some of that aspect to Jesus. In the book of Matthew, chapter 11, verse 28 through 30, it says this: "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So Jesus was gentle. He was kind. That was who he was, but he also was tough. He was blunt with the religious leaders. He called them sons of hell. He called them snakes and hypocrites. He called out his disciples and asked them to do a ton. He, at one point, made a whip and turned over tables because people were making the place of worship into a marketplace. Jesus was tough and unafraid, and the place where we see his strength the most is a time when he was physically the weakest. As he was getting led to the cross, as he's been beaten and tortured and spit on, rather than wield his power and destroy everybody who was causing him pain, he took it. He was willing to face that for us. That is strength. He took the beating. Strength, even in his weakest moments.
Come on, man.
Jesus was willing to be weak, but it all pointed to his strength. And he was tough enough to face torture. He even did it for us. And that's the same call for us. We're called to be real men who find our ultimate strength in God. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10, it says this: "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power." Our strength comes from him. Our courage needs to come from him. And rather than escaping, we're needing to be depending on God, to be leaning into him for his strength at work in us. Our culture says a real man is rugged individualist, self-dependent. No, we're called to be God-dependent. And that's not being weak. It's in our weakness, we're leaning into his strength. When I was a kid, my dad would throw me up in the air and catch me, and throw me up in the air and catch me. He would throw me in the waves and then scoop me out of the water and throw me in another wave. He would throw me on my bed and I'd bounce around and then run back in his arms. He'd throw me in the bed again. And, as a kid, I was pretty weak. If he threw me in the air and then just left me, I would have went crashing down to the ground and gotten hurt. Throw me into a wave and didn't scoop me up, I wasn't a great swimmer. But the one thing I wasn't was ever afraid, because my dad was strong and my dad had me. We ask these core questions as guys. Now, am I enough? Do I have what it takes? Do I have that kind of strength or not? Listen, you don't have to fear your weaknesses, because you have a Heavenly Father who's got you. And in our weaknesses, he's strong. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 10 says this: "That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses and insults and hardships and persecutions and difficulties. For when I'm weak, then I'm strong." That was written by a guy named Paul, who was tough. He wasn't a weak guy. He faced shipwrecks and beatings, persecution. He was thrown in jail multiple times, bit by a poisonous snake. This was a tough dude. And yet he says, in my weakness, then I'm strong because of God's work in and through me. It's not about us being strong in and of ourselves. It's strength in weakness. It's letting God be strong in our lives. It's depending on him. It's being man enough to admit that we can't do it on our own. It's this feeling that we have so many different times in our relationships where like, I want to be a great dad, but I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't know how to handle this situation. I want to be a great husband, but I don't know how to meet her needs right now. And it's leaning into God's strength in our weakness. And he promises us that he will walk with us. And like that dad that catches us and he's strong in our weakness, that God will be strong in our weaknesses, that he'll walk alongside us and he'll give us what we need so we can be the men that he's called us to be. You know, Paul talked about in 2 Corinthians these weaknesses that he had and how it actually helped him lean into God and to depend on him. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7 through 10, it says this: "Or because of these surpassingly great revelations, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.' Therefore I'll boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses and insults and hardships and persecutions and difficulties. For when I'm weak, then I'm strong." So Paul talks about his weaknesses. He said, like, man, if I didn't have those weaknesses, I could become conceited. I could start thinking it was all about me. But instead, God's power is made perfect in my weakness. So I have his power at work. I'm depending on him being strong, not me being strong. That in my weakness, he's strong. And I love this passage too, because what it's really telling us is that we can't use our excuses as an out to just escape. That God will take our weaknesses and he will be strong in the middle of them. And if God calls us to it, he can see us through it. When God originates in our life, God can orchestrate through our life. He's calling us to be God dependent, not to be Liam Neeson and go kill everybody on our own. We're called to be leaning into our relationship with God and letting his power be at work in our lives, that in our weakness, he's strong, that he can give us the strength to be the husband, the father, the friend, the coworker that we need to be.
Come on, man.
Yeah, every guy will ask themselves and will wonder, am I enough? That's really the wrong question. The right question is God enough? Will I trust him? In Philippians chapter 4, verse 13, it says, "I can do all things through him who gives me strength." It's not I can do all things just because I'm strong or tough or whatever it is. It's I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Strength in weakness. Do what he calls us to do. So guys, listen, we need to man up. We need to get in the game, not in our own power, not in our own strength, in his strength. We're going to have that warrior mentality. We're going to fight for the right things, all in his power and his strength. And when we do that, we can change the dynamics in our families. You can be the one to break the chain in your family of men who cheated on their spouses. You can be the one to stick around and be the great dad. You can be the one to lead your family spiritually. In our weakness, in those moments when we feel like, man, we don't know what we're doing, we cling to God and we lean into his strength. And in his strength, you can be the man that he's designed you and made you to be, and that your family needs you to be.
Who's the man? Who's the man? Who's the man?